Pressing record.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first roundtable discussion organized by the Center of Voice Studies in 2026. And the theme of the first roundtable discussion is that of voices from the listener's perspective. And we have several speakers here, and I'll just introduce them from my left to my right. So we have Ida Thomsen Krarup, who's doing research on voice quality and within linguistics as well. And you have just started your PhD, and it sounds very exciting, and it's multimodal, including the tactile mode as well. Then we have Josh Penney sitting over there. And Josh is a lecturer at the Department of Linguistics at Macquarie University in Australia. And everybody's interest today is voice quality. So of course, Josh is that as well. Josh is a sociophonetician, and I think I'll stop there. Otherwise, I'll just keep spending 10 minutes introducing everybody. Then I can see Nicolai Pharao, and Nicolai is an associate professor at the Department of Nordic Studies and Linguistics at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. And Nicolai is a phonetician and a sociophonetician and a sociolinguist, also interested in voice studies. Surprise, surprise. Then we have Freja Hovgaard Knudsen. And Freja is also very much interested in the social aspects of voice quality, both in production and in perception. And Freja finished her MA thesis research how long ago?
This summer.
Last year. And Freja is interested in media portrayals of characters with different voices. And Freja was associated with Aarhus University in Denmark, as is Ida, I forgot to say. Then I can see we have Schoonderbeek Hansen, who's also at Aarhus University at the Nordic Department. Yes, and also at the Dialectology Center of Danish. Yes, yes. Then we have Anna-Kai Jørgensen. And Anna was or still is associated with the University of Copenhagen.
I still am, kind of.
You still are. And Anna has recently got some funding to start new projects as well. And Anna is a sociolinguist, a phonetician working on voices and accommodation and gender and sexuality, social mobility, all kinds of things.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Finally, I can see Yonatan. Actually, I've never asked you how you pronounce your name. Yonatan Ungermann Goldshtein.
Goldshtein?
Goldshtein.
Yeah, it depends.
Yonatan Ungermann Goldshtein, who is a postdoc working with Nicolai, so at the University of Copenhagen. And you are doing a project on place, identity, and voices together. And you are a phonologist, a phonetician, a sociolinguist, interested in geographies. Yes. Yes. Okay, so I'll just explain. Oh, and online we have Peña, who I know is also interested in voice quality and phonetics and phonology and all kinds of interesting things related to these from both production and perception and lab phonology as well. So the way things will work today is that I gathered some questions of interest from the key speakers who were invited. And so I'll try to moderate the progression through these questions as best as I can. We will simply discuss what we think. The audience members are very welcome to chip in at any point, just signal in some way online as well. If you write something in the chat, I'll monitor it. At some point, I'll announce a break. I have reserved 2 hours for this, but it's okay if it doesn't last 2 hours. It will last as long as it lasts, but not more than 2 hours. Okay, so I'm going to start with a very broad question because there are members of the center who are not necessarily linguists, and everybody here is a linguist. So why should we care about the listener to begin with? Who do I ask? Yonatan.
Yeah, I could start because I think personally, one of the reasons why I started becoming interested in the listener as a sort of a topic for research was because in a number of studies, social linguistic studies on the perception of different accents, they didn't find any sort of effects of accent. So when they went to another place and repeated this type of research project, they didn't find that people really sort of made differences between the different accents. And when you sort of started digging more into these findings, it seems like one of the reasons why they didn't find any differences was not because people didn't pay attention to the social meaning of different voices and different accented voices, but maybe because there was a lot of heterogeneity in how people within the population paid attention to, or the different social meaning that they applied to the voices. And that made it seem like there was no overall population effect, because there wasn't. And this is one of the motivations for some of the work that me and Nicolai are doing now, where we're sort of looking more into like what is the listener's sort of personal baggage, and how does that shape the ways in which they listen to voices. Yeah.
And Nicolai, maybe you could comment on why we care about this more from a societal point of view.
Yeah. So I think generally in linguistic research, there's been a tendency to sort of focus on the speaker, right? And we've assumed much more homogeneity in listener groups. And then maybe we have speaker groups, and we have all this awareness of how speakers come from all different sorts of backgrounds, and lots of things go into their identities. And then a few studies have sort of recently been showing no, the listener brings something to the table, right? And I think that some of the things we all know, because I mean, even in speech perception, so forget the social, just like which cues do you pick up? We all know that is an active process. Perception isn't recognizing a pattern, it's interpreting an input. And as soon as you've got that, you've got to expect that people do that differently. And whether you want to look at cognitive styles, like some of the Alan Yu's work in sound change and what happens and the role of the listener, or whether you look at it from how to perceive different speakers and different ways of speaking and how do we categorize them, so sort of a more social thing, to just keep in mind that listeners are not just the same. And that they bring all sorts of preconceptions and differences in strategies to the table when they do the tasks that we ask them to. And that's actually something that we all are doing constantly, right? And which I like to do experiments, and sometimes I forget that this is also just something that happens. And certainly people tend to forget that when we talk about experiments, it is because we're trying to get at what's happening all the time.
How do people in society actually perceive things? How they evaluate people based on how they speak.
And it's been a mystery, a bit of. I mean, when some of these socio-phonetic studies that started coming out were sort of like, and I was like, why have we not looked at this more? Anna, you phrased it quite differently. Why aren't we obsessed with listeners and listener differences, right? Because,
So why aren't we?
Why
should we be?
Well, I mean, I'm in the variationist social linguistics, and we've had a very experimental approach and language attitude studies. And I think a lot of it has to do with how we do our experiments, because as I think about it, language is about conversation. And I guess we want to find out, how do people actually talk to each other in real life? But what we do when we do these studies is not that. We go in and we measure some little small thing, or we manipulate some part of a speech sample, and then we present it to the listener. And then we forget that, as Yonatan said, it doesn't mean the same for everyone. So I think, from a societal perspective, I think it's also important to just remember that language is social, and that's why it interests me a lot. And I think a lot of as I also argued in my PhD thesis, I think a lot of the traditional variationist studies that have been done in Denmark kind of overlook the interactive perspective of what language is. So And so I think we must assume that language is always directed at someone. It just depends who's the imagined person. I think that's also a way of thinking about the listener, like this very classic like audience design, Alan Bell kind of way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and who
do you imagine? Like as we're speaking here, I imagine you, but I also imagine someone who might go to YouTube and look at it. So there's a lot of stuff going on at the same time. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting that you mentioned the sort of the variationist background and sort of this as a perspective, because also a critique that has often been raised of classical variationist studies is this critique that it assumes that sort of, for example, places are containers of language, of speech, and that different sort of speech different features of speech belongs to different places. And I think in much of the language attitude research literature that has been this, we could raise the same critique that spaces have also been seen as containers of particular attitudes, and the focus on the listener can be a way to sort of break away from that and say, no, attitudes do not belong to different places. It's not like if you come from this region, you have this attitude, but rather attitudes belong to different speakers who relate to this place in which they are in different ways and stuff like that. So I think it's very important to think about this sort of disciplinary background and what it brings along and how we can challenge
and
expand.
We see this. I do some work on aging and language. And so I've been recently doing a review of how researchers have been approaching age as a variable. And there you actually see some more in-depth approaches in recent years where they are more increasingly also constructivists, constructivists looking at, how old does the person feel? How do we motivate the generational divisions? But that's only in the production studies. The moment you look at the fewer perception studies of how do listeners of different age groups and different age identities listen, then suddenly we seem to be decades behind in time when we compare it to the treatment of age in production studies. So I completely agree. I was actually quite shocked when I discovered this. Yeah. So now we are actually moving to some of the specifics. So there are two other bigger questions I would like us to focus on. The first one is what exactly listeners listen to when it comes to the different parameters of voices. So that's one area I would like us to explore next. And then we've already anticipated the second question, which is which aspects of the listener are important to consider and why. And later we will discuss methods as well. But so if we start with the voice, what exactly should we care about? So I'm starting in a very generic sense, but what is it about the voice that we should care about? Also thinking of the audience who are not necessarily linguists. Freya?
About the voice or about the listener?
The voice.
The voice.
Which aspects of the voice should we care about?
Basically all of it.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. Yeah,
horrible, but it's the whole thing. Because it's like, of course, like lexical content matters. That's why we communicate in the first place. But their information in the voice with like voice quality and prosody and it's just there's so much information there as well that you pick up on that you aren't even aware that you're picking up on.
I think. Are you? Okay. So I think you're absolutely right in stating that we need to care about all of it. And I think the only way to care about all of it is to care about the voice from multiple different angles. So some of what Nicolai and I are trying to do in our current research project is to sort of with the same cohort of participants to use different methods, some that are more sort of holistic, playing clips that like longer stretches of speech that people evaluate, and then others that are more sort of focused on particular features in order to see what kind of information do the listeners react to in these, and do they do it in the same ways and all of these things. So I think this thing about using multiple angles is very important, and triangulating.
Yeah, it's like we need to care about everything, but we can't care about everything all at once.
Yeah.
We need
Yeah.
to like focus on different aspects at different times too.
Because as soon as you start caring about single features, then you're losing some of the contextuality in a sense, right? And as soon as you want to do like full blown like language in context, you lose sort of this control of what is the different features, right?
And you don't know what feature is doing a particular sort of heavy load of the work. And that's sort of like that's what I think is tricky and a future challenge, right? Like when is sounding hoarse important and when is it not?
Yeah, I just had a thought to that. Like, there's been some really interesting methodological developments recently with the slick test that Christine Boas has adopted from Christmas, yeah, in Sheffield. That's actually able to track more like real time, what is the listener reacting to? And if you pair that with more information on the listeners as people or other factors, then I think that's actually quite useful. And it has shown some quite fun results that you can see, like in some contexts, this specific feature means a lot, and in others it doesn't mean anything.
But it also depends on what questions you're asking, what you're interested in, right? Because that feature might be playing a particular role that you're interested in, or it might be just something about giving social information about a particular group, or only information about a particular group or particular speakers, but only to particular listeners, to bring it all back together to the listener. So if I, as a listener, have particular associations with particular voices, then that might mean something to me, but it might not mean something to someone else who doesn't have those same associations. So it's kind of asking the question, measuring the right thing, measuring the big or the little, but then also paying attention to who you're asking to do those tasks and knowing about them is really important, I think.
But just something as simple as knowing where the speakers are from. I think the study we're doing, Míša and I and Christine, on laryngeal variation in the Funan dialect. There's also some clear patterns there with the Zealand speakers. They definitely are tuned to something else than the Jutlandic and Funan speakers. So there seems to be some kind of divide there. I mean, that's already a place to start, right?
I think that sort of it narrows down to sort of this methodological sort of question of like, so where listeners are from becomes a proxy for their exposure and this kind of thing. And I think it like, so when we're sort of trying to approach this aspect of the listeners, I think it's at least the way that I try to think about these variables about the listeners is that they are all proxies that can for something and can be broken down into different things. Because so you then have a listener background, and then what Nicolai and I are trying to do in our project is breaking down different ways of relating to the place and other places that you have experience with when you come from a particular place. Right? So trying to tear apart what has to do with exposure, what has to do with emotions about the place and place identities and orientation towards and these kind of things. And it's the same with age, right? That it's a proxy for maturity and it's a proxy for experience, it's a proxy for body, age and cognitive functioning, but an imperfect one, and gender, the same thing, and so on.
Just getting back to the voice in this is because everything, and let's try and get a holistic picture and these. But one of the things that strikes me is that I like to use matched guise designs in various ways, and often you find reactions that are like you have two different voices doing the two different registers. And listeners believe that there were two different voices. One was from this place and one was from the other place. They do not recognize that two people are doing the same two different things, right? They ascribe register to voice in some sense. If by voice we also sort of mean persona or something, or because then sometimes they don't. Then they're like, wait, we already heard that one. And you're like, oh, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. Please continue. Nothing to see here. Right? Because paradigm. And it's interesting to me what features trick a listener. I mean, what makes the listener perceive it as a different voice, and what makes it sound like the same voice saying something slightly differently. A little bit like second language acquisition speakers. I always wonder if my voice sounds different when I speak English than when I speak Danish, because I am. Yeah, because I do both.
But that actually leads us to a question that Josh asked, because Josh was also interested in when voice quality is sufficient to trigger certain perceptions, or do people only pay attention to voice quality variation if it's combined with other linguistic features? And as far as I know, there isn't all that much work in that area.
No, as far as I know either. But so that's something that I'm working on at the moment, and part of the reason it came up was we, with colleagues in Germany, we were looking at Keatsdeutsch, and we found a fairly robust difference in voice quality between Keatsdeutsch and non-Keatsdeutsch, normal German speakers. Sorry to use the word normal, shouldn't do that. But there was a voice quality difference there, and we did a perceptual experiment. Again, potentially we had to pay more attention to our listeners, but glossing over that. In general, and I'm simplifying here, but in general, German listeners didn't use that voice quality cue, that voice quality difference, as a cue to perception of the ethnicity of the speaker. There was a little bit more of a complicated result than that, but in general, it wasn't a robust cue. But there are other cues, right? So if I'm a speaker of an ethnolectal variety or an L2 variety, I won't only necessarily have a difference in voice quality, but I might be using other phonetic markers. And so is it that you have a combination of a certain voice type or voice quality with certain phonetic markers or with certain L2 markers or something like that? And those two things together trigger that perception in me, or is it one or the other? So, and what's more important from a listener perspective?
It's like research done on cue weighing.
Exactly.
In phonological contrasts, where people have been asking these questions for much longer, I think. Than sociolinguists have been asking themselves.
I mean, we know that the context plays huge roles, so we know.
Yeah. No, that's true.
So we know that there is a variation in sibilance that exists in the Copenhagen multi-ethnic.
Could you tell
that
us
is
more?
Completely ignored. Yeah, okay. So we did some perceptual studies in the tens, where we varied fronted versus alveolar S in different prosodic frames. So it wasn't voice quality; it was the rhythm. And nobody notices the difference in the S's when it's the more sort of staccato rhythm pattern that's common to the ethnolect. It's like, this is an immigrant, and like, and any way you ask, it's like.
Even if they use the standard,
even if they use the standard, it doesn't matter. Whereas it carries a lot of social meaning. The segment is doing all the work in a different sort of prosodic context, and so of course they sort of blend in together. I guess I think the question then becomes, for whom does that work, right? Is that the same? We tried to, and we didn't do it well, but we tried to have people that probably also themselves would sometimes use the multi-ethnolectic register, and we didn't find an effect. It wasn't that they then noticed, and it wasn't. I mean, we tried to, even within the group. Yeah, you didn't find it within group effects, and you didn't find. We tried to ask in many, but we also sort of forced them. We were sort of like, well, if you're just giving your first impressions, maybe your first impression is non-white, immigrant background, the different labels they used. What if make you tell me how? Because it's associated with femininity in white speech, and still no effect. And that looks like it is a conditioning of the combination, regardless of which. But then that's why So what is that? That's also a really iconic. Both of these features are quite sort of iconic of the styles of speech. The fronted S is iconically femininely coded, and the rhythm is very much tied to this. It's a certain type of immigrant background. It's the street. It's much like the Keats persona, right? And what if you look at things that aren't so iconically related to things and that aren't related to social categories that are very much discussed and very, like, I mean, Denmark is a society where instead of talking about real problems, we can always talk about race. And people invest a lot in it. And what if we look at other sort of social factors? Sorry,
I think no, but I think that actually nicely touches on several points that have already been mentioned, because we started with what Anna was mentioning about, well, why are we not more obsessed with the listener? Because surely when we plan how we speak, we plan it with audiences in mind. Then at the same time, we've already started talking about methods and how complex these are. And something I've seen several times is that there are many more production studies in sociolinguistics than perception studies. And so we often seem to assume that just because there is a difference in production, surely it will be perceptually meaningful in some way. Otherwise, why would people do it? But then I think there is a potential danger if we do perceptual studies, which are quite simplistic. It seems also that we've mostly agreed that quite a lot of perceptual studies are more simplistic than a lot of production studies in sociolinguistics, because there has been less focus on the listener, and it's been much more flat, the focus on the listener as well. And so there is, I think, also a potential danger if somebody says, well, you know, the production studies show these correlations with different social factors, but we don't find them in this one perception experiment we did, without asking the listeners about all kinds of things. So I think, I think this example you gave, I think it actually beautifully shows how complicated this is. And just because there is a null result, that doesn't mean the link isn't there. Maybe we should ask questions differently.
And I actually think that sometimes when we get the null result, that's when we should really start caring about the listener. Of course, we should always care about the listener, but then why did we get the null result? Did we get the null result because no one attends to this, or did we get the null result because half think this and the other half think that?
And we should care about the null result also, because even if we have excluded all potential listener type details, then how come we still get it in the production but not in the perception? Surely this is something we should explain as well. Yes, and I could see Anna, and then we also have a contribution from Jai. So
yeah, that was just about the production perception thing, because for my PhD I did a study on accommodation between speakers of Danish, 2 different Danish regions, and I had a lot of null results. And it turned out that maybe it's actually very much to do with the listener that I got a null result, because I had expected these people to accommodate each other on these different features that I had chosen to look at, like doing acoustic analyses of vowels and also a bit more holistically, but still I had expected them to adapt to each other. But maybe they didn't do much of that because they were actually speaking to someone who did not need them to adapt, or they were in an environment where it wasn't really, there was no reason to, because they were in a kind of a linguistic safe space. They were speaking to other students in a place where they grew up. So yeah, that was one contribution. And then when I did do a perception study, that of course found something completely different than all of my acoustic analyses. I just did a simple AXB study where I asked people, like, do these people sound more like before or after? But there's also huge methodological issues with that, because what are you asking people? What are they? First of all, I didn't have enough listeners to actually control for where they came from, because maybe they wouldn't be able to hear the finer details if they were not from these regions that I looked at. I don't know. Or maybe they would actually hear the differences because they were not immersed. Several things to say about that. But these results were also kind of mixed, the perception results. And I think it's like, what does it mean when you ask a person to listen to just one word 3 times, and then you ask them, does this sound more like this? It's what are people doing? I mean, most of the people who did the study, many commented out like, I don't know what I was supposed to do. I couldn't hear any difference. I'm sorry. Like my friends who did it were like, was there something I was supposed to? So I think it's also in a context like the Danish one, where in a lot of the cases there aren't that many differences. I think it's also really hard to capture these very small, like fine-grained. And I think that's why we often turn to the phonetics or the acoustic, because it's really easy. It's easy. You can actually get a result. You can say, I measured this vowel and I know that it changed, right? You cannot ask a person whether they listened for this exact vowel also, right? So that's, yeah. Sorry to go back to methodology again.
That makes so much sense, but I think we are doomed to head towards methodology, because I think that's the danger of having people who specialize within the same thing. So I think we should actually start discussing the methods. But before we do this, I'm just going to check our people online as well. And we have, yes, we have Jai. Jai, I know you should be able to talk as well, and we should be able to hear you.
Oh, yeah. I just fixated on a comment that Nicolai made, what seems like ages and ages ago now, about how do people sound the same in the languages that they speak, if they speak multiple languages? And evidence suggests, well, first, a big question is, what do we mean by sounding different or sounding the same? Those are really difficult concepts to quantify. But if you ask people, for example, to perform tasks where performance improves, the more familiar a talker, more familiar you are with the talker, the answer is no if you train someone on one voice and then test them in the other. So there's I threw a paper in the chat, but for example, a study comparing perception of I don't recall what the stimuli exactly they used were, but perception of some sort of sentences in English, but the 2 different listener groups were trained on the same voices they heard in test, but in German or in English. So they were trained on bilinguals, either in English or German, and then all tested in English. And there was no talker familiarity benefit for the group that was trained on the same speaker speaking German, but there was a talker familiarity effect if the listeners were trained in English. So there's something there suggesting that whatever it means to sound different or sound the same in the 2 languages you speak, yeah, people, I mean, I really hesitate to say like people sound different, because what does that mean? But there's something about how we process and how we store voices that is inseparable from the language that we're hearing. Anyway, that was a minor point
Even
that I just happened to know a paper that kind of addressed.
Even F0 though, right? Like I don't know, I haven't actually measured this, but I have the feeling that when I speak English and when I speak German, my pitch range is totally different. Not totally different, but it's definitely the changes. And I notice it with it's a lot more obvious then, but with female speakers, because the range is expanded anyway, that often if you have an English speaking female who then is speaking German, but that range just shrinks. And and that's
and I think that there are also studies that attest to this, that languages have specific F0 ranges, and that bilingual speakers will switch to the range that is appropriate. And I have seen papers on this too, and I will try to find them and put them in the chat, but I've seen that as well. So there could be real there are real acoustic differences between languages that people will implement with their voice, which is probably part of what people pick up on to make people sound different in the two languages. And then there's probably also a host of other things as well. But yes, pitch is definitely one of them. I will try to find the paper I'm thinking of. I think it was like English and Japanese or something.
Yeah. Famously, Japanese women get much lower pitch.
Oh my gosh.
When they switch to.
Oh my gosh. There are two things I really want to say. One about, please remind me if I forget. But what Josh was mentioning, I have one purely anecdotal example, but it will remain with me for the rest of my life. So when I lived in Manchester, I was teaching through the medium of English. This is not my mother tongue. And at one point I designed a segmentation experiment for students. And so I decided to record myself produce words in Czech, which is my mother tongue. I know that I raise my pitch when I speak in English than when I speak in Czech. And once I measured my average pitch in English, and it was in the 160 something. So I thought, oh, actually, it's lower than I thought it would be. But apparently it's even lower in Czech. And I had a lot of different seminar groups, and they didn't know that the Czech example came from me. I just recorded sentences with a lot of consonants to make it as alien as possible, so that they really had to pay attention to the acoustics to start thinking about segmentation criteria. So I recorded things like strčprskrskrk, or there were also voice things, so we could actually measure pitch as well. Svrnkasnám řeřichy. These kind of sentences, and apart from getting the annual reaction of, oh, it's not working, it's just some sort of noise, and then realizing, oh, this noise is my mother tongue. There was always one person in each seminar group who referred to the speaker as a he. And I always found it a bit extreme because I thought I only switched into a different language, which I know you don't speak. I know I lower my pitch, but really do I lower it so much that your gender classification completely changes in my case? And also, they actually know the speaker. It's me. They've been hearing me the whole semester. And it wasn't just a couple of random people. It happened in every single seminar group for a period of 3 years. I then started expecting that there will be one person who will do it. So I always thought that was a bit extreme. And then you mentioned something about the Japanese. Oh, sorry. I guess you want to.
Well, no, but so it's sort of like so some features sort of have, I don't know, a stronger indexical relationship to certain traits or something, and maybe pitch is doing that. So I was thinking about, we all also vary in our pitch. So,
but I'm also super breathy. And I know this from acoustics as well. I am incredibly breathy. So that sort of balances out both in Czech and in English. So yes, I have a low pitch, but then I'm super breathy. So
but segments do some things too. So we did an experiment. The one I talked about earlier was all about male voices, and then we tried to repeat it in female voices. And the students were told, you're going to listen to 6 different girls, and listen to them now. And then we put palatalized T in one of them. And then was like, I'm sorry, you said we were just going to listen to girls. And you're like, yes, no, this is a girl.
Oh, wow.
Are you sure?
Wow.
Did you not make a mistake? And that's just a segment. There was nothing, the pitch was completely or whatever, but so, and again, that's because it's iconically, is an iconically indexical of a particular kind of streetwise non-white persona, right? And which is attached then to masculinity. So the way, but so it's into all these things that we find in production experiments that should go with it, but it doesn't really matter, because once the listener does an attachment to certain things or ascribes value, then the signal can be what it is, but they are already off interpreting in different ways, right?
Yeah. Inge?
Yeah, I was thinking about, because you're changing from English, which is not your mother tongue, and to Czech, which is, and then you have a lower pitch. Is it because the differentiation is mother tongue or not, or is it different languages that have lower pitches? Because I'm talking because Danish is not my mother tongue, but that Dutch is. And I'm sometimes listening to my children who do not speak that much Dutch, but they kind of familiarize Dutch with something nice, and me, of course. So are there some languages who have lower pitches than others, or is it something to do with
nativeness?
Yeah, nativeness.
I don't know.
No?
I think there's a study showing a tendency for higher pitch in
If it's not a mother tongue.
because of the tension.
That makes sense.
It makes sense.
Trying to be more precise, and that stiffens everything.
Yeah.
But are you then? I've always wondered, do people perceive me as more feminine when I speak English than when I speak Czech? I have no idea, but I've been wondering.
You can test it.
Yeah.
You never speak Czech to us, so exactly.
But that would also require both listeners, Czech listeners and non-Czech.
Yeah.
That's also a thing.
Yeah. So now we are moving to the methodology again. And I've been trying to keep it at bay, because I think there we will really open all kinds of horrendous things, beautiful horrendous things. But just as a bridge between what Josh was saying and what's coming, I thought I would also share one experience from a vocal attractiveness study where we did a study where we wanted to see which voices are attractive, physically attractive to native Danish listeners. And we manipulated different degrees of breathiness, so softness of voice, but at the same time there was pitch variation in the data. And then we found, we were a bit surprised, because we had several testing rounds. We made sure that the speakers don't sound too childlike or too pathological. But there was one female listener whose evaluations were very different from the other female. Sorry, there was one female speaker whose evaluations were very different than those of the other two female speakers. And then there was also one male speaker whose evaluations were very different than of the other two, the other two male speakers. And they were different. So for the female who, sorry, I should explain it better. So we had different degrees of breathiness. We had 3 steps, and we expected that the softer the voice is, the more attractive it will be evaluated as. And that is what we found, except for the one female with the highest pitch. So her pitch was within the adult range, but the listeners didn't seem to like the high pitch. That was really the only thing we could identify. And one of the participants even commented on her sounding childlike, even though we really did what we could to not have these kind of voices. And so it seemed that for that speaker, it didn't matter what she was doing with breathiness, because as long as the pitch was a bit too high, she was just nothing else she did with breathiness could override the evaluation of the pitch. And then the one male speaker who didn't seem very popular, that it wasn't about pitch, but his the sort of supralaryngeal setting seemed much more tense than with the other speakers. And so that seemed, in his case, to override any of the breathiness, that they just didn't like him. He had very low attractiveness ratings, and so we couldn't even evaluate the breathiness manipulations for him. And so that made me start wondering about all kinds of methodological issues, such as, okay, what do we need to ask about the listeners? Because, for instance, I wouldn't expect that a female pitch of 200 hertz, sorry, F0 of 200 hertz, would be evaluated as childlike. But then apparently for some of our listeners it was. And so, as some of you know, I'm interested in how our age preferences in a partner might impact then what kind of voices do we find attractive, because we know, and Nicolai mentioned the Japanese study, we also know that in Japan and in China and in South Korea there are very specific vocal styles, mainly associated with female speech, but we know males do them too. In China there is Sajiao, And then we have buriko in Japan, and in South Korea it's adekyo. And it's associated with very different discourses. Some people describe it as this whiny female, childlike baby talk. And so it's obvious that there are people who really dislike it, but at the same time, it's obvious that these speakers do it for a purpose. There must be some audience that actually appreciates it. And so one of the things that I would like to explore with Freya, Yonatan, and Anna is whether our preferences for our own age as listeners, does that impact which voices we perceive as attractive? So if I heard a male voice that doesn't sound mature, I would not care. I would not be attracted to that kind of voice. So I know I care about mature male voices. What does that voice sound like? I don't know. We haven't done the work yet. But do all listeners care about mature men? Probably not, or mature women, or whatever. And so that opens all kinds of methodological questions. So to start with some basics, Freya asked, what things should we pay attention to as researchers working on language perception? What is it we should ask about the listener?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it depends on your research questions in a lot of ways, because like what you're attracted to or the age group you're attracted to might not matter in all kind of research, but sometimes it do. But also just from like a mathematical standpoint, it's difficult to tease apart what we should care about, because if we just collect all the information about a listener that we can, we are bound to get a significant result, but it might not be valid. Like it would just be like it probability determines that you probably get one, but you can't rely on it if you just collect everything.
And a lot of them will be correlated with one another.
So it is very difficult. That being said, I think there are some stuff that probably more or less always have some kind of effect. So I found, for example, that like the native language of a listener really affected how good they were at determining where a speaker was from, if it was a speaker from their own language. So Danish listeners were much better at saying, oh, this speaker is Danish, than non-Danish participants, even non-Danish participants or listeners who were seemingly based in Denmark and were likely listening, and probably even hearing more Danish English than the Danish listeners. They're probably communicating Danish primarily, but they were, Danish listeners was just really sharp on that, whereas the others were pretty random.
But I think what you're saying is really interesting, and I also think it also depends on what we mean with the variables that we choose, because as you said earlier, Míša, what is age? Is it a number, or is it how old do I feel? And the same with gender, like how do I relate to my gender? How do I identify? How is it correlated with my sexuality? And I mean, I did my master's on transgender voices, and some of the interviews I had one who was a trans woman who was also a lesbian. And she said she didn't think about her voice at all because it wasn't a problem. That she didn't have to worry about having a very low voice in the lesbian community because it was considered attractive. So she didn't have to do anything about. She didn't have a problem. Whereas some other trans women might have a problem if they sound too masculine, if they want to appeal to cis men or whoever it might be. So I think it's also very good to be careful with what does gender mean in this study, what does age mean, what does geography mean? Yeah. From somewhere. What does that mean?
And I think it's always the case that we have to remember that when we're running a model and we have some variables, they are sort of predicting things, but there's always this residual thing standing there, which is all the other things that we could also put into our model in theory. That could destroy the effects that we have and that could enhance them and all these things. So we have to think a lot about like what are the specific questions that we're asking and what aspects of the listener are we interested in for this particular question? Because in our study, for example, I mean, what we're interested in is how different relations to the place of residence and different geographical orientations, sort of away from the place of residence, shape your perception of people, of voices from different places, right? So we're asking we have very specific hypotheses about these variables that we put into the model, and it would probably not matter for our study if we, and of course, attraction does probably affect the way in which they evaluate. Like if they find someone one of the voices very attractive, for example, they would probably rate that higher, but it wouldn't be the thing that we're interested in from the vantage point of our particular questions.
And also you can't do it all, because from what you say, you already said that you have specific questions which from the larger space we are discussing this in, they are narrow. But the design of your project is such that you have to split it into multiple studies, because you can't even squeeze.
We split everything. the linguistic experimentation into different studies. But we actually in our the big primary study we did, we listed a lot of background information, and that took the participants between like 30 and 45 minutes to complete, which is quite a big task. So we could have asked them the double amount of questions, but then they would sort of die in the course, and we wouldn't get ethics approval for that. So
there's also then the question of how invested they are, because the more you ask, then I'm a participant, I'm getting annoyed with this, and exactly.
So we try to vary tasks and do all kinds of things in order to avoid fatigue in the research design, but we were already sort of pushing the boundaries of the possible.
But I think that something that's interesting in that is that so we're interested in associations with place, and therefore we've asked about your in different ways your perceptions of those places in them independently of listening to these samples. But then the pattern that emerges is that there probably is some sort of, there's like about a third of them that are like big city oriented. And it doesn't matter which of the two big cities in the country. Sorry, Aalborg. That they mean, it's just that they are big city oriented. And they then very specifically evaluate Aarhus voices, but not Copenhagen voices, positively, right? So there's an interesting, what is that? It doesn't look like it's just what I feel about Aarhus. It's something about what I feel about urban versus not. And my point being just that we asked them about the specific places, thinking it would be about that. And then again, listeners, like other subjects, do what they want. And it turns out that the parameter maybe for some of them is urbanness and not.
But we also but I haven't had time to look at that part of the data yet. We actually also have specific questions aimed at eliciting what is referred to in the literature as settlement identity. So basically meaning, do you see yourself as a city type of person or a rural type of person or somewhere in between? So we have sort of, but that's also a part of our research design, trying to understand the listeners. We have tried to approach this sort of, so the basic is that we're asking about their relations to these different particular places, but we have gathered a lot of sort of supplementary material in order to see like what is the social meaning of this type of relation to these places. Like, is it people with particular educational interests, people from particular backgrounds, people who have particular settlement identities, people who live in more rural versus urban places already, and all of these things. So we really try to sort of have a lot of background variables that we can use to interpret our findings with, in an effort to understand the listeners.
And now I might have, I might I don't know how to say that, puncture your bubble, because I think it sounds very good to have a lot of data.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's also something that we always try to do to mitigate all of the limitations of our studies. And sometimes I wonder, would we necessarily understand more if we had more data? Sometimes it feels like we are a bit afraid of, we want to do quantitative methods, right? Because we're phoneticians, so we love doing that. But maybe sometimes we should also consider doing more qualitative work and trying to get more into the depth than looking at the breadth of, because I'm thinking, sometimes it feels like we're asking, oh, if only we could ask these people what they meant when they filled out this questionnaire. And I'm thinking, we can actually ask them. And I think we might benefit from doing studies that were a bit more narrow in terms of how many participants were in there, but maybe also went back to the same people many more times. And kind of try to track them and say, well, you said this in the interview last time. Do you still feel like this? So, what did you mean? I thought about that. What did you mean by that? And stuff like that, right? You said you are a city type. Are you still a city type now that you have ended up living here several years later?
And we did actually gather sort of quite a bit of qualitative as well. And also we asked them if they wanted to be re-interviewed. So we have contact information for quite a few of these people. So it would be really interesting to, exactly. But I think more than just piling sort of quantitative data on top of each other and putting it into a big model, which you could do, but which would probably be a mess. It's this thing about, okay, in sort of the post hoc also interpretation of the data, see, okay, these people who don't fit in, like, do they belong to some category, or you're trying to understand have different sort of angles to approaching who are these listeners, who are these people. Does any of this explain the messiness or the weirdness or the patterns and so on?
Can I just make a point?
Yeah,
for that?
sure.
It's something that, if you're collecting speech data, so production, very often you'll, not always, but if it's a socio study, you also have like an interview, right, that you've recorded. And so in that case, you can then go back and go, this listener is doing something different. You listen to the recording and, they make comments about X, Y, Z. And then you can kind of frame your interpretation based on that. But with the listeners, we never do that. We have a questionnaire, and then we might have an exit interview where, what did you think about this study? Do you have anything to say about X, Y, or Z?
Optional.
Exactly, optional, and that's it. And you don't have as much information to draw on. And I think that's maybe not that anyone wants more work, but maybe we need to have more information about who we're. I think that's kind of the point that you were making earlier, or a few of us were making, that we don't know our listeners as well as our speakers. It's hard then to interpret the data when we have those cases where it doesn't match up with everything else or with our expectations.
And there are also just sort of like sometimes ethical concerns related to getting to know the speakers better, because we promise them anonymity when they fill out questionnaires, for example.
Do people need a short break of 5 minutes? Or
maybe I would like a short break.
Right, just to maybe open the door so we get some oxygen, and then is 5 minutes enough?
I think that's perfect. I'm just gonna go grab a glass of water.
Cool.
Across the thank you. We start the recording.
Hello, everybody. We have just taken a little break, and we are back to discuss more methodology in analyzing listeners' perceptions of voices. And so I'm going to start with a question from, and now I don't know if it was from Yonatan or Nicolai. Should we work with multidimensional approaches to listener attributes? And we've already started discussing this. Yes, Yonatan, you are doing this now, right?
Yes, and I think the answer is yes. We should, and of course that's very broad, but let me think what is the best way to answer that. I think one of the, it can mean a lot of things, that question, but I think one of the things that I have tried to do in my work is to sort of, when working with categories such as place attachment, for example, or place identity, sense of place, these things, to engage with literature outside of the social linguistic literature, sort of dig into the methodological literature in the fields of place attachment research and human geography, and this to see like what are the ways in which they deal with these multidimensional and complex constructs that we're interested in, because it can otherwise, like if we don't engage seriously with these methodologies that are outside of, we know a lot about language, and we want to know about the listeners, the backgrounds of the listeners. So we have to draw on the sociological literature, social psychology literature, and then we have to do a lot of work to try to understand the methodologies that they use if we want to do things correctly. And if we want to do things, and by correctly, I mean in ways that get at the things that we're interested in and not get at other things. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you would recommend, no, but I think you are recommending that, because you are right, we've now had decades of sociolinguistics, so we have really thought carefully about the linguistic matter.
Yeah.
But we are always slightly lagging behind on the social and the psychological, because we usually take things from other fields. And so in a sense, we have to become experts also in all kinds of other fields.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly the thing. And that requires us to do a lot of work, learning methodologies, learning research technique, learning quantitative techniques and types of statistics and types of reasoning that are outside of what we're taught in our sort of disciplinary, in our disciplines. So I guess that's my answer to the question.
Nicolai?
Yeah, so a field of study that I've never engaged with, but sort of always thought we should, is performance studies, because surely if somebody knows about audiences and audience reception and have tried to figure out, and there was one thing once, Kevin Watson and Lynn Clark were doing all that stuff, and before the whole click thing, there were all this, what are people responding to, right? And I think Lynn was in touch with some people sort of looking at all these measuring audience reactions, and it's just really hard. and so you sort of like you limit yourself, but I think if we want to know about people perceiving and being engaged in things, surely performance studies must know about this.
Yeah, we have just actually had a talk from a dramaturgist at the center. It's on our YouTube channel. Freya and I attended.
Oh, she was in Copenhagen.
Yeah, she was in Copenhagen last week.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yes,
Claire,
Claire French.
Right, yeah.
But you must have, I don't know if she gave the same talk, but I was just,
I saw the title.
were you not also stunned by, because in linguistics, when we talk about performativity, it's like high performance, low performance, or embodiment, and that's pretty much it. And then Claire was like, oh, we have 8 layers of embodiment. And then I said, oh my God, I'm so interested to engage with it. How are we not engaging with this? So I
impenetrable, some of it, but
but I agree. I think we should not only for voice perception, but actually also in production studies. I think that would make so much sense. And that will actually be partly what one of our next roundtables will be about, on voices, technology, and mediatization. So stay tuned for August.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, but Freya?
No, I think
Anna?
It's just, I don't want to take your point, but I think it maps on really well to the effective responses to voices. Because if we're an audience and we have a reaction to voices, because also we were thinking or talking about before that it's really hard to know what people think, and I think it's also hard for them, even if we ask them. Like as a listener, you will be like, I don't like that voice, and it might not even be possible to pinpoint exactly if it's because it's a woman speaking, or if it's the breathiness, or if it's nasality, or whatever, like what the words they use or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think we need to focus more on affect, which has been done a lot in gender studies and critical studies in general, and philosophy, I guess, which is also a bit daunting for me. So, but yeah, but I think we could, maybe you have
and
on that.
Nicolai asks the question of how do we measure affect? Because as we emailed about this, and you said, well, we usually work with scales. Is that the best we could do?
Yeah, I asked the question because I would like one of you to tell me. No, but also because I think that just anecdotally, I was cooking and listening to a debate thing on the radio, and a voice came on, and it annoyed me. And my first reaction was, oh, just shut up. I mean, nobody really cares about. And also, you're young. What do you know, right? So speaking of ages and whatever, and and in the context, right? And yes, it was a woman's voice. And being a properly trained social linguist, I of course stopped myself and paid attention. And she was really, really sensible, right? And it was this really sort of like, okay, someone is actually sort of saying, hey, yeah, can we bring it back on track? What we're actually talking about, because you're trying to take this to, and then I got engaged in the thing, and I managed to go beyond my reaction, right?
But not everybody
And the interesting thing for me was this sort of like, the first thing that happened was an effective response. It wasn't, she sounds blonde or tall or educated, or, you know. And I would just really like to be able to capture those, and because and I mean, and it fits in with theories about models of indexicality and blah. So that's also nice, but mainly because that's what I think matters a lot in a day-to-day is not, you know, the reason people are skeptical of certain groups to the point that maybe we would label them racist or ageist or sexist is, I think, often because they feel unsafe, right? There's something that is discomforting to them, and that's the primary deal. And there's but I don't. But how do you? Like, we can't equip people with sensors that measure skin responses. But maybe
people in Lund has done that as well. Okay. Yeah, I know.
Do you have galvanized skin response?
I think so. No, we have we have something that can do it. I wanted to do skin conductance experiments, so we should talk more. But I'm not aware of sociolinguists using this. Or are there sociolinguists using it?
I'm not sure. I was on a sort of a tour of the lab at Lund University where they talked about some study that they maybe did or maybe thought of doing with people. I think it had to do with social anxiety and something with interaction situations or listening, looking at some stimuli. I don't remember the exact study, but yeah, they did something along those lines.
Because I wondered if this could be also used for overt versus covert attitude.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the implicit, explicit type of thing, right? Like what are the immediate responses and what are the things that we think about? Yeah, we should do that.
Ida, I am so happy we have you as our lab phonetics lab assistant, because I know in 2020 I got some equipment on this, but it's been 6 years, so I can't quite remember what exactly we have there. But we should explore, and maybe we should do something with it then.
I mean, there's also some of the things that's a recreational fear lab.
That's
that might be able to be tweaked.
What now?
Yeah, we have a fear lab.
Recreational fear.
Okay.
Yeah, so they go out for like dystopia, the haunted houses.
Right. Okay.
And I know they've measured like people's heart rate and stuff.
Oh, of course.
And they're like, oh, when are you most scared?
But they are.
Everyone's doing pupillometry now.
They are interested in voices.
Yeah.
So if we were serious about this, I know Matthias Klesen, every Halloween, he has a whole several week thing. And it's always 1 year they produce at least one study based on that massive data collection. And I know he's fascinated with voices. So if we put our heads together,
and I mean, and some of those responses might resemble fear response, like what the body does. So
exactly. Yeah. Is that important? Yeah.
But But there are also something about well, you were listening to the radio, but now in the political debate about rural areas being annoyed by the kind of windmills and all kinds of things that's going to destroy the nature out there, and there's something in voices and the way they talk and using rural accent sometimes because they're getting so excited that they just forget everything about talking nicely and things like that. So there's also something about that, having something at stake as a speaker.
Yeah.
That's something I really want to look into more.
Yeah, me too.
But there are studies of affect in communication.
Yes.
So we have colleagues at the Nordic department, Carsten Stay, for
Yeah.
example.
But are they
It's a little-
perception related?
No, because he's from culture and media. Yeah, and it's mostly with illness, patient illness. Yeah. But there are probably something. In the kind of serious diseases and death. Yeah. But the scores analytic studies. So.
Yeah.
I have actually been thinking about doing also a roundtable on caring. So it sounds like that's something that maybe we could do later in 2026 or 27. Yeah. And invite Carsten over as well.
Would love to, I think.
Yeah. And I think the affect, I mean, then we can discuss stance taking and all kinds of. Yes. But I'm going to come back to the original question a bit more closely, because Nicolai, you are right that what I've mainly seen, and I've been doing this myself, is that we have these scales. How evil, I've also been doing projects on morality, how evil or good do specific voices sound, and we've been using these scales from here to there. Where do you place it? How attractive does a voice sound from here to there? Where do you place it? And so you are also asking whether that's the best way to evaluate affect.
Yeah, I think I'm also scales are handy in many ways, and they make quantification easy. And I think I'm kind of a little bit more concerned with using the right scales or the relevant scales and again, depending on who are we asking, and I think that so we chose to do it in the current project because it relates to a whole body of literature that we need to be able to talk to them. But using open questions and looking at that more is I think something I'd like to go back to doing. Focus group interviews we talked about yesterday, that why don't we do this more often, this more qualitative sort of approach, and maybe that's where we need to start if we want to find out how to do the affective level.
But for that I think for that we need something much more major to happen, and that's something that Josh and I were talking about, that it just seems that within phonetics there is this fetishism for the quantitative, so heaven forbid. And if you try to do something purely qualitative, no one's going to publish it if it's one of the key phonetics journals. So I'm also thinking, even if we did this study, could we actually publish it in a phonetics journal, or would we then have to publish it in a different discipline?
Or maybe in social linguistics.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
That would be
some of them.
way of
Language and speech. Language and speech.
Are they
stuff like that.
qualitatively friendly?
Sort of like multidisciplinary.
Oh, that's nice. But that's Yes,
So
that
that's
sounds
not
like a nice,
Not headed in jazz.
God, yeah.
It's not a step away from the quantitative stuff, but I do think it would be interesting to have both the question like, what do you think about this voice on whatever scale you choose, and then what would others think about this voice? So that gets those words where like, oh, but I'm not
One of those.
Yeah,
my neighbors vote for that for
exactly. So I'm not racist, but I know that others who are
the guy down the street.
Yeah.
You know, that's faculty, it's the right wing.
I assume so,
I
I got
think
that
it's going to be
context.
diminished. I think it's diminished because there is a lot more.
But I mean, there's other classes now.
Yes,
so
it is, yeah.
same
It's
with
kind of,
They're
But,
really split into groups.
Freya, getting back to listeners, you also asked a really interesting question. How should we factor in ourselves as listeners when we describe a voice for research?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. But how, because I could listen to a voice and be like, okay, this voice is doing this and this and this, and of course I'm not as trained as the rest of you, but I'm also carrying some other baggage, right? Because I'm also just a listener. I can never be a pure researcher. Especially if you have to describe it as more than like acoustics. You're attributing words or using all of your indexes to describe this voice.
That also returns to something we spoke about in the beginning, about the sort of the holistic versus the single feature thing, because when you're working with single features, it's probably easier to say, okay, this is what's doing the job, because this is the thing that we're manipulating, right? But if you're working with longer stretches of speech, there's so much going on that, okay, I think this one sounds breathy, but people only pay attention to the pitch. Okay, out the window, right? And I didn't pay attention to that. And also when we listen as experts, we're like, oh yeah, this pitch thing is really doing a lot, but then you know, speakers only hear the accent or whatever, right? That's that one.
And there's also the issue of when you're holistic descriptions, that there are so many different traditions, different sets of terminology as well, that often people talk past one another, or people don't have access to those terminologies and then use whatever they can, so like lay terms that then have another meaning again. And I find this a lot when I speak, because I work in a department where there's a large speech pathology group. And sometimes I have the feeling I have no idea what they're talking about, and they have no idea what I'm talking about, but we're describing the same thing essentially, just with different histories and different literatures. And I find that can make it complicated just for these kinds of holistic descriptions. And there was a paper, I think it was in JASA actually, from Jody Krineman last year, the year before, kind of getting at that, about how to describe and what do we mean when we describe different voices, which was an interesting paper. Actually, I'm pretty sure it was in JASA, but it wasn't a very quantitative paper. It was quite different, if my memory serves me. But worth a look. And that certainly gave me similar ideas about like how do we actually, what do we mean when we're describing, if I'm not talking about H1 minus H2 or F0 or something, what am I actually talking about this speaker's particular voice and how it differs from that speaker's particular voice?
I had one horror experience when I always wanted to publish in the Journal of Voice, and a few years ago I managed to do it, but during the reviewing process I discovered something that has shaken me, and I think I'll always remain shaken by it. Because of course we worked with the I should explain, all of the authors of this paper were linguists, trained as linguists, linguistically oriented voice specialists. But the Journal of Voice, although it's interdisciplinary, very often there are clinicians publishing in the Journal of Voice. And of course we have been reading papers published there, so we were somehow acculturated to how they used which terms. But then one of the reviewers, I'm pretty sure all of our reviewers were more on the clinical side, just from how they wrote the reviews. And then one of them said, but you are discussing these voices as breathy and not breathy, but how do you know they are not harsh? You really need to add a perceptual evaluation, otherwise how can you know these voices are not harsh? And I thought, harsh? Why on earth should they be harsh? If somebody tells me a harsh voice, I'm thinking of the growly, Aslingian type of constricted larynx harsh. And so then we thought, okay, maybe that doesn't make any sense. Let's go to the clinical literature. And of course, I had read papers within clinical voice studies that had used the term harsh without explaining it, because it's a basic term. And so at that point I realized, oh my God, they use the term harsh in a completely different way than I do. And I didn't know. I always thought that when I was reading about harsh voice in their studies, it meant this kind of voice, but actually it doesn't. It's it's more of a tense voice rather than growl, whispery.
Right. Okay.
So that for me was a bit and this happened even though we knew about disciplinary differences, and despite the fact that we had been reading papers produced within that discipline. So it shook me because I thought, God, how many more cases like this are there that I don't know about?
I believe this is a term from I think it originated in some psychological discipline, but the notion of jingle jangle fallacies, and I don't remember which is which, but one of them, a jingle fallacy maybe, is believing that two concepts are the same thing because they have the same name, and the jangle fallacies is believing that two concepts are different because they have different names, and it might be the opposite, but yeah. So jingle jangle fallacies is something really typical, and it's very typical in a lot of the sort of social science, social psychology-ish literature that I'm engaging with currently, where in place attachment research, where people may call something sense of place, place identity, place attachment, relations to place orientation, all of these things, and there's both the issue of the jingles and the jangles, right? That people may use the same notion for things they measured in very different ways that capture very different things, and they may also go the other way around. Yeah, so something we have to bear in mind.
So my next question is, that's actually Nicolai's question. And so now we are moving into ecological we have been within ecological validity, but more explicitly, how can we increase the ecological validity and further contextualize speaker perception experiments without losing experimental precision and control? So this question sort of comes back to where we started, where Freya was telling us about just the mathematical complexities. And of course, we want to cover as much as we can, but there are practical limitations to it, and even methodologically that might actually be problematic if we just gather a lot of data. So yes, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think it's difficult Well, I think it's probably one first step is to sort of getting better at contextualizing in what sense am I asking you your opinion of these things that you're about to listen to. So I think that a project that I've seen do it well was the Accent Bias in Britain project that did sort of traditional register of evaluations of different varieties of English, and then also had lawyers evaluate them and decide whether would they give this person a job or not. And where you find the traditional biases when you're just asking about dialect, because we're all interested in language, so we tend to go and ask people about things that are just related to language. But people live in the real world and have to do real things, and getting a job or not, it has a consequence, right? And it turned out that one of them, there was still an effect, but for the rest of them, no, it was the content of the answer that was given in a job talk. And that I just think is one way to do it. And again, because it was still experimentally, and it was a particular listener population and all controlled and and I just wondered like how if when what we're doing is evaluation, then situations in which that really matters, such as political debates, where like does it, am I going to lose all my voters because I switch into dialect, or because I don't go into it, or whatever? Like, what are the consequences of doing that, right? Do I see more genuine those studies of Obama changing slight things in his rhetorical style when electioneering in certain contexts or whatever.
And there are actually a lot of production studies on this, which always, and of course I understand why it's production studies, because what are you supposed to do? You can't take the politician to your lab.
No.
So I get it, but at the same time we then have to extrapolate about, so what kind of audience outcomes did we get? And even if we make correlations, is there necessarily a link between these or not? But what you are proposing is maybe that we do perceptual experiments where we situate them with a scenario saying, you know, you are listening to this politician who advocates blah, blah, blah. And then you have your secret manipulation within that context.
Exactly.
And then a very liberal politician who contrasts with the first one and a manipulation within that.
That might be a research project that I'm proposing in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Well, please get the funding.
Yes, I will.
So I can see that we are almost at the end of the second hour, so I'll only ask 3 more questions. One isn't actually from the pool of the questions that I gathered from you, but it's a question I heard. I think it was Salita Gdeamonte who asked this question at an N-Wave talk, where she wondered, and it stuck with me. When we do these kind of experiments, are we not reinforcing people's societal judgments and evaluations simply by asking them to do this? And I think it's a fantastic question to ask. And every time I do anything perceptual, the question emerges and I sort of push it back into where it came from. Yeah, but I can't help wondering, are we not doing something not all that ethical by forcing people to evaluate things?
I get what you're saying, but on the other hand, it could also have the opposite effect, because you're suddenly asking them to consider something that usually happens in the subconscious. So it becomes conscious in a way, and that could make them reflect on, like, why do I actually think this about this voice? So I don't know, but I could see that it could have their, depending on where in the process you are, maybe as a listener, where you're.
You are actually right. I did do one attitudinal experiment where this is exactly what happened. We asked people, so some of the AI companies have, as you know, AI companies have been creating different voices, and Scarlett Johansson entered a law case with one of these companies, and she accused them of stealing her voice. And so the relevant company released a statement saying that, well, no, it wasn't her voice. We just aimed at voices that feel timeless. And so then Eva Shekai and I were wondering, okay, what the hell is a timeless voice? What does a timeless voice feel like? Do different people evaluate this the same way? So I exposed our innocent first semester students to an experiment we did where we asked a lot of open-ended questions. And it's true, we asked them, what comes to your mind when you hear a timeless voice? And then we started asking them, can you give us examples? So we moved from the more generic to more specific. And towards the end, quite a lot of participants actually said, well, we asked them, I think, have you learned anything from this? And several of the participants said, actually, I have realized that apparently I have strong attitudes about this. And they were also discovering that they had gendered attitudes. So I think that's actually, I haven't thought about this. But then I think one should be very careful about how to ask so that this
so that
can
it
happen.
becomes a reflection, and then that people start reflecting and not just
We definitely didn't plan the experiment with that in mind. It just we sort of realized after that that's what happened. Nicolai?
We've had some responses when we looked at attitudes towards drag queens and cis women and gay men, and in particular sort of verbal guys thing. And we had these responses as well of like, I think it's really wrong to make teenagers even consider such connections. And then others saying, oh, it was so weird because I had no doubt which one sounded gay. And then I realized you can't tell from the way people talk what their sexuality is. And that was interesting because I do it anyway. And like, so you get these sort of like, And that's lovely. And I always like talking about the one who had that kind of experience, right? Because
but how many
feel like you're educated. But then what about the ones where like, oh, this was uncomfortable and are you perpetuating stereotypes and just, but one of the things is like, but why was it uncomfortable to label someone gay? Or to score them on a scale of a particular sexual orientation. And if that is uncomfortable, does that not tell us something about some sort of norms that still exist? And don't we therefore need to keep doing it? And I'm absolutely certain that the people who voice these considerations or concerns probably are people who are not, who are very sort of aware of prejudices and power going on in society. But if we don't ask, doesn't it just? I mean, yeah. And then it just sort of like then we pretend it's not there or that it's gone.
Do you think?
I agree with the concern, right? But I also think that that reaction is in itself a really interesting data
finding. Yeah. Do you think we should also ask people how comfortable they felt doing the survey?
Yeah.
So that every single one of us actually has to comment in some way. Yeah. Just to add one more question to the simple survey.
Can I say something to that? I think it also comes down to who we are as researchers, and I think there are a lot of gay men in phonetics and in social linguistics in general, and that's great that they do research on gay stereotypes. But I think there maybe is something to Sally's point with when it comes to ethnicity and these divides that we have in Denmark. I think it can be quite uncomfortable. I think I don't think a study like what you did in like 15, 20 years ago with the S's and the multi-ethnoleg would be as well received today outside.
No, because that's what we did 4 years ago here and the reaction.
And there are really not many non-white researchers in our community. And I think that's also about like who are we as listeners, right? Yeah. Well, we are white, most of us, and we have some kind of background. And I think that's something to consider, like who am I to look at this specific topic?
Like who's asking the question and why it's being asked.
Because you can come with the best of intentions, but there might be stuff that you overlook if you're not really, if you don't have personal experience with the stereotypes that we're looking at.
Can I just say something to that? But I also think that it's a similar situation in Australia in terms of the academic community is predominantly white and mainstream. But given that we have this position of privilege, then at least if we're coming at it from good intentions, which I hope most of us are, and I assume that's the case, then we can actually use that privilege in order to do something more positive. So obviously you have to be aware and you have to have good community contacts and you have to engage with those communities to make sure you're not doing something to proliferate. You don't want to end up doing something negative, but I mean, ideally the idea is that we're going to be integrating those people from those communities and also training them up to do the work as well, right? So
yeah, we hope so.
Yeah. Although it's sometimes also difficult to do due to structural inequalities and so on and so forth.
I mean, but I think, a way to address the concern is to go back to open questions, right? And instead of imposing certain scales, and then to maybe combine that with the different sort of measures of social desirability of responses and these ways of back. Because some people are absolutely fine giving prejudiced answers, and the majority, of course, are not. But my concern always with the open questions is, but then what if we just don't get at it because, well, this is how I feel, but I can't say that. You're not allowed to say that, and that's just. Like I completely agree that it's not easy and that we should just ignore those, people's feelings. In fact, those are the ones we're interested in some ways, right? But I also worry we then don't get at some things that are actually going on because it wasn't nice to talk. I mean, I've done one with education where a really close friend of mine and I actually ended up, who's not a linguist or anything, but participated and halfway through stopped and wrote me an email and said, my God, what are you, idiots? This is the stupidest thing. We have to talk about this. I'm like, okay, wow. He was really invested in it because it turned out that he prefers working class accents or has certain values and whatever. It really went against his ideological. Really, I mean, of course, it was a privileged situation because we talk often, but and I think my response is the same. Is that like, yeah, okay, no, I get that. I'm like, and I no, we don't think this is the only way of seeing it. But if we don't ask,
we won't know.
We won't. Maybe structural inequality is perpetuated because no one ever goes and sees what the mechanisms maintaining them are.
But I'm thinking maybe we should just be more specific. Like you said, the accent bias study in the UK is a really good example of being, okay, there's a clear structural inequality here. Is there a linguistic component to that? Yes.
Yeah.
Is it mitigated if you have the skills and you use smart words or whatever? Yes. And that's the way to do societal impact that actually lifts people up and says, you're doing a good job and just keep on doing that.
Yeah.
Because that might actually, that's also an optimistic conclusion, right? Or there's at least the possibility for an optimistic conclusion and helping someone in an area where it's actually, where it makes sense. And it's just not spreading stereotypes around and being like, oh, now we know that. And right, I think that may be a way to.
And this is the perfect note for us to start concluding, because we are now reaching the end of the second hour. So I just wanted to ask each of you if there is a take-home message you would like to pass on to the universe of people working on perception of voice quality. And so, Anna, you've already injected one such message into the universe. Would you like, is there anything else that you would like to emphasize?
No, I don't think, I think I'll end where I started, that language is social and we should remember that.
Which is, that also every time I start lecturing on sociolinguistics and on the origin of sociolinguistics, and I mentioned William Leboeuf refusing to adopt the term sociolinguistics, that's actually exactly what you just reminded me of as well. Language is social. Yonatan?
Well, I think some of what is concerning, what I'm most concerned with at the moment, and something we also spend a lot of time talking about, are the sort of the methodological complexities in talking about the listener. And I don't know if I have like a big sort of concluding remark, but I think it's very nice that we had this sort of forum to discuss sort of put the different sort of complexities out there. And I think sociolinguistics need to think more about this. And that's what we're doing now. So that's great.
Yeah, I guess as someone who primarily looks at like language in television and movies, it's like whether or not we study it, people are picking up on these things that's happening in the voice and are using it to portray certain kinds of characters and types and whatnot. So it's like that's probably why we should study it, because that gains knowledge and makes us more aware of both the voice of the listener and what it does to hear these things.
Nicolai?
Yeah, context, I guess. Whether that context is generated by the mood of that we place the listener in, so there is sort of like an internal context, whatever that might mean, or more easily, I think definitely like let's get our experiments to work so that they're closer to the world that we're trying to understand, with all of the things in it.
Yeah.
Look, I don't really have anything too insightful to finish on, but I will say that I'm admittedly often far more focused on the speaker and the spoken rather than on the listener and the perceiver. And so even in a single case like me, it's a good idea to be often more aware and to consider these other aspects. And so it's been a nice opportunity to hear lots of different perspectives and get lots of interesting ideas about things that should be considered in the future.
The rest of our audience, would you like to say anything before we say goodbye? Okay, in this case, I would like to thank everybody. Could we clap for one another? Thank you so much for coming. And if anybody has watched this YouTube video, thank you for sticking with us for 2 hours. Stay tuned, there will be more roundtables.